After the smash hit of the first Jurassic Park movie and the best-selling success of its novel counterpart, plans for a continuation were near inevitable. Michael Klayton would end up penning his sequel book, The Lost World, which saw release in 1995, and 2 years later, that book's film adaptation, once again directed by Steven Spielberg and written by David Koepp, would see wide release on May 23rd of 1997. While the first film's status as an incredible movie is rarely contested, Lost World's reputation is far more contentious, and I've certainly been on my own journey with it over the years. I didn't like this movie growing up. In fact, if you had asked 8-year-old me what their least favorite movie of the trilogy was, back when it was just a trilogy, I'd have easily answered with this one. Not helping was the online discourse surrounding this film being mostly negative, and being the brainless twit that I was, I couldn't be bothered to form my own opinion and thought it easier to just go along with what Daddy Doug told me. However, in the intervening years and as public opinion on this movie seemed to soften, I got curious and wondered if it really was as bad as I remembered it being. I sat down, watched it for the first time in years, and it was alright. I mean, it's nowhere near as good as the first one, but at least it has the decency to continue the story rather than just repeating it, and introduces new elements and ideas to the Jurassic canon. We got a second island, new dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs' existence becoming known to the whole world rather than just a handful of survivors. Add on top of that some great action, a couple cool new characters, and another terrific John Williams score, and you have, in my opinion, a perfectly serviceable follow-up. But could it have been more? Unlike Jurassic Park, which had what one could consider an average amount of deleted scenes, at least for this kind of movie, The Lost World has a sizably larger amount of cut material owed to its more complicated production. Koepp's script strays much further from Klayton's source material than it did the first go-around, to the point where really only the most essential bullet points remain intact. On top of that, while Koepp solo wrote this film, his earlier drafts are still radically different from the final movie. And just what were some of the scenes, characters, and dinosaurs that didn't make the cut? Let's find out as we dive into the deleted scenes of The Lost World, Jurassic Park. Thought alternate endings weren't enough? How about alternate beginnings? This opening would have the crew of a Japanese fishing boat what? Pulling up a Parasaurolophus carcass that was caught in their net, which would then break off and fall into the water below. Like with the baby Triceratops from the original, a model of the dinosaur corpse was constructed, and although this opening obviously doesn't appear in any version of the film I'm aware of, the prop itself would later make an appearance in the T-Rex nest scene, as well as later in Jurassic Park 3. Guess it's only good for being eaten by T-Rexes. Kinda what most people thought of hadrosaurs for the longest time. I do wonder if the scene was at all inspired by the Zuayo-Maru incident, where the large, decomposing carcass of an unidentified animal was actually found by a Japanese fishing crew, and speculation arose over it being the remains of a late surviving extinct animal, like a plesiosaur or something. It later turned out to be a basking shark, but we didn't have to talk about that right now. For the scene itself, while I do think it would have been a bit of a cool opener, I can see why they didn't use it, since I don't really know how they would have tied it into the rest of the story. I mean, the beach scene at least has relevance to the rest of the film, even if I'll never truly forgive it for giving us the false sense of hope that this movie actually killed a kid. Come on, Spielberg, as if kids dying in your movies is beneath you or something. I digress. Either way, speaking of that beach scene and its fallout in-universe, there's another later scene that expands upon it, which we'll get to right now. This is one of 2 deleted scenes for this movie that was actually filmed and uploaded to YouTube for us to see. Again, stark contrast to the last episode, right? This scene actually depicts the removal of John Hammond as InGen CEO and the rise to power of his successor, Peter Ludlow, the film's main antagonist. The filmed version is a little different than the one featured in earlier drafts of the script, in which Hammond is actually present during the board meeting. Both versions allude to the damages suffered in the aftermath of the Isla Nublar incident, revealing that InGen has had to shell out a pretty penny to pay for the deaths of Gennaro, Arnold, and Muldoon, as well as, and I quote, demolition, deconstruction, and disposal of Isla Nublar facilities, organic and inorganic, implying that in deleted scene alternate universe land, they just decided to up and nuke the entire first island for some reason, and it apparently set InGen back $126 million, so maybe Hammond deserved to get shit canned for that brilliant executive decision. It's also interesting that if this scene had stayed, it would have gone in between the opening scene and Malcolm's reintroduction. I know this because A, I read the script, and B, if you've seen the movie, you'll remember that there's a rather darkly humorous transition between the mother screaming and Ian yawning at the subway station. The boardroom scene opens with a random InGen executive yawning, so it would have been the same idea either way, just a different scene it was transitioning to. This part also ends with the sound of a subway roaring. I rest my case, Your Honor. Also, since this was actually shot and edited and can be viewed, I can talk about the filmmaking on display. And it's pretty good. Most of it's done in a classic Spielberg wonder, not overly showy or pretentious, just adding a little extra visual interest when you realize how long the scene's gone without a cut. This sequence also gives Arliss Howard some extra time to establish his Peter Ludlow character. I don't think this actor gets enough credit for his performance in the rest of the movie in general. Yes, it's a paper-thin character, but this guy knows how to play a slimy snob who you're anxiously waiting to see get eaten by a dinosaur. The first movie didn't really have anyone like that, except Gennaro and maybe Dennis, and even they weren't that bad. One of the best additions this movie made to the Jurassic Park series was the introduction of Roland Tembo. Even people that don't like this movie tend to argue that this character, played by the late Pete Postlethwaite, that rhymed, was one of the best parts. A badass big game hunter hell-bent on bagging himself a T-Rex and then probably mounting its stuffed head over his fireplace or something. It's almost too stupid, but the role is written and performed with such seriousness and conviction that it really works. And this scene would have been his introduction. In it, Roland is greeted by his friend and hunting partner Ajay, who I'll have more to say about later in the video, but for now, just know that he was supposed to get a lot more screen time in earlier versions, but his role was drastically reduced in the final edit, ultimately giving his untimely death less impact. This scene would have not only served to establish him and Roland's friendship, but also show a more honorable side to Roland right off the bat when he intervenes on a group of tourists harassing a waitress. Roland challenges the arch asshat by saying he's no true gentleman, of which he can think of no greater insult. The tourist is unimpressed and states that he can take Roland with one hand behind his back. He cannot. And that's with Roland having one hand behind his back. After Roland's finished his impromptu ass-kicking, Ajay states that he only broke the man's jaw out of mere boredom. And it's true that Roland has hunted so much game that the consequence is that there's no challenge worthy of his time anymore. Ajay promises Roland he has just the thing. This scene has gained a lot of notoriety in the Jurassic fandom over the years, often being regarded as one of the best deleted scenes in the franchise's history. And it's not hard to see why. It establishes Roland, Ajay, and the two's relationship well, and everyone plays their roles great. However, I said last time that my usual reaction to deleted scenes is, yeah, that's cool, but I see why it was cut. I might get shit for this, but I actually feel the same way about this scene as well. Hear me out, I'll try and explain. In the final film, Roland is initially introduced as just another hunter. Sure, he's got his own quirks and personality, but so do Dieter, Ludlow, and Burke, and we're initially led to believe Roland is just as bad as them. Well, maybe not Burke, he's okay. Throughout the movie, however, we're gradually shown more of his humanity. Him checking to make sure Sarah isn't wounded, personally searching for Dieter after the latter's gone missing, and showing remorse for Ajay's death, ultimately leading to his final scene, in which he becomes one of the few characters to exit the film and the franchise on his own terms. If this had been his first scene, all of that would have gone out the window. We'd have already known he wasn't all that bad when he's introduced beating a guy's ass because he was being a perv. So while it is a great scene, and I'm definitely glad it was shot and included in the Topps comic adaptation, I also understand why it ultimately didn't make the cut. Just a quick one I wanted to throw in here. Apparently at one point in development, the scene with the Stegosaurus at the beginning was also going to feature a pair of Mamenchisaurus, engaging in copulation. Mamenchisaurus, if you're unaware, are the long necks featured in the dinosaur roundup scene, the one that the hunter on the bike rides under. Why they didn't just use Brachiosaurus again is anyone's guess, but hey, it's one more dinosaur for the size chart, right? Anyway, the Mamenchisaurus would have again played a part in the scene at the river, when Ian and the others run towards them to get away from the Stegosaurus, essentially using the larger dinosaurs as cover, which I always thought was a cool idea. My guess as to why this was left out though is that it would have seemed too similar to the Brachiosaurus scene in the last movie. Also, since this part is set in a heavily forested area and Mamenchisaurus are rather huge, they would have needed a different location for the dinosaurs to fit. Poor Junior. From having his leg broken, to being kidnapped, returned to his parents, kidnapped again, taken to a strange new land populated by the same creatures that kidnapped him, kidnapped by the people that took him the first time, to finally being returned home, and then possibly being killed by a rogue mutant Spinosaurus a few years later. Maybe. Possibly. Depends on who you ask. Probably not. But what did this all stem from? The leg breaking. Who was responsible for the injury that set off this chain reaction? Well, in the movie, it cuts right from Roland scheming with Ajay on how to lure the buck T-Rex to their location, to the baby chained to the ground, leading the audience to infer that it was Roland and Ajay who injured the baby to lure out its father. However, this deleted scene would have shown that it was actually a drunk Ludlow that tripped over and fell on the baby, breaking its leg. David Koepp himself was sad to see this scene go, as the lead into the leg breaking would have been a conversation between Tembo and Peter, and yeah, to say that they're two prominent supporting characters, they don't really have that many scenes together. While I already said what I think about showing Roland's redeeming aspects too early in the movie, this scene would have been a better place to start establishing them, especially since the final film kinda goes too far in the opposite direction. I know Roland is a hunter and a tough son of a bitch to be sure, but breaking a baby animal's leg when you're already using its panicked cries to draw out its parents seems really cold, even for him. On the other hand, tripping and breaking said animal's leg from being a drunken idiot seems very in character for Ludlow. Not to mention, the fact that it was Ludlow who broke Junior's leg would give the ending an added sense of karma, since it's the baby killing the person who was responsible for its injury in the first place, by pouncing on him no less. So, in a rare instance of me actually wishing a deleted scene wasn't deleted, I do think the film would have benefited from leaving this part intact. You may notice a conspicuous lack of any mentions of the Klayton novel in this video as compared to the last one. That's because, like I said, the Lost World movie deviates heavily from its source material, and many book-only scenes weren't even considered for featuring in this movie. But there was one scene from the book that almost got adapted. Kinda. One of the most iconic and best scenes from the movie is one where the Velociraptors attack the High-Hide. It's an extended dinosaur action sequence, one of many in this far more action-packed sequel, which is at least one aspect the film did carry over. As for the specific scene itself, while the version with the raptors was never planned to my knowledge, storyboards do exist of the T-Rex pair attacking the High-Hide. When, where, and why this scene would have transpired is unknown, and seeing as how these storyboards are the only evidence of its existence, it's safe to say it didn't last very long. Would have been a nice callback to this scene, though.
Actually, it put him in a very convenient biting height.
On top of all the deleted scenes, this movie had an entirely deleted character that wasn't in any of the books. David Koepp just made him up, then wrote him out. Dr. Judson was a paleontologist who, in earlier drafts of the screenplay, accompanied Ian's team to the island, where he would then butt heads with Ludlow's paleontologist, Robert Burke. Judson would eventually get killed off by the Velociraptors in the worker village as the others were attempting to escape. One good thing I can say about this character is that his banter with Burke would have given the latter more of a chance for his personality to shine through, rather than mostly just being around for exposition and to look like Robert Backer. On the other hand, much of his dialogue would eventually be handed over to Burke anyway after Judson was deleted. Besides, wasn't Sarah already Hammond's paleontologist? Why'd they need another one? Hell, we already had 2 paleontologists in the damn movie. How dare this dinosaur island have dinosaur experts on it? I kid, but really, Judson's inclusion seems rather superfluous, and I know it's easy to say that in hindsight with his subsequent deletion, but that just means either Koepp, Spielberg, or someone else came to the same conclusion that I did. When compared to the other pteranodons featured in the Jurassic franchise, the ones from the Lost World are by far and away the most accurate and also the most docile. The one short scene we get has them looking pretty chill. But it wasn't always this way. Originally, the long grass scene was supposed to go on a bit longer and feature the surviving hunters escaping on hang gliders and getting ripped to shreds by pteranodons. Okay, that sounds a little Jurassic World-y mentality of just throwing dinosaur action scenes at us with no consideration for spacing them out or even having them make sense. Where would the hang gliders have even come from? This seems like major, wouldn't it be cool if we put XYZ in the movie without thinking about it syndrome. Fortunately, the powers that be came to their senses on this one and cut it out. It would have given Ajay a memorably gruesome death. Wait, I skipped ahead in the script a little. The death of Ajay Sidhu is only alluded to in the long grass scene, in which the character of Nick Van Owen finds what he thinks is Ajay's bag just before, presumably, Ajay himself is heard screaming in the distance. His passing is later confirmed by Roland after he's tranquilized the buck T-Rex. This is, once again, an example of Ajay's role being reduced in the final cut, as previously, at least 2 more definitive deaths were tossed around. One would take place in the aforementioned Pteranodon attack, which would see Ajay torn apart by the flying beasts, a sight so horrific, Sarah would be forced to look away. I'm guessing this was before they decided to have her do just that when Bert gets eaten. I don't really know how graphic they intended on making this part. I mean, The Lost World is probably already the most violent Jurassic Park movie, so I wonder how much of this they would have shown. A more restrained and, I would argue, more effective death scene can be observed in the film's screenplay, which Ajay becomes separated from the other hunters in the long grass, and as the velociraptors close in for the kill, he simply closes his eyes. Again, really giving Ajay the shaft in the actual movie, robbing him of a surprisingly subtle, even dignified demise. It would have added weight to Roland's resignation if we both got to know a big contributing factor to it a little bit better and actually see him go on screen. Like with Ludlow breaking the baby Rex's leg, I think this is one deleted scene that would have helped the film more than hurt it. Speaking of Ludlow. So you know how the San Diego scene in the last act of the movie seems kinda rushed and like it wasn't originally supposed to be there? Well, that's because it was kinda rushed and wasn't originally supposed to be there. Almost every Jurassic film has some kind of last-minute change to its ending, and Lost World is no exception. Although this time around, I actually have a hard time deciding which ending I prefer, and this scene is half of the reasons why. Originally, after the Tyrannosaurus raid on the camp, Roland and Ludlow, wow, they're coming up a lot in this video, were going to set out to track down and kill the buck after failing to do so during the previous attack. This would lead into an extended hunting sequence through Isla Sorna's volcanic rivers. Well, it sure didn't say anything about that in the brochure. That would culminate with Ludlow being picked up and taken away by the male Tyrannosaur, dropped in the nest, pounced on by the baby, and killed. Much like the movie. These scenes would be intercut with the Velociraptor worker village attack, except in this early script, Roland intervenes at the last minute and shoots one of the raptors dead with his big-ass rifle, which he never actually fires on screen in the movie. From there, him and the remaining survivors would escape. This would have been really damn cool to see play out on screen, and I just skimmed through what the contents of the hunting scenes would actually be. A really good video exists by Klayton Fioriti of him doing a reading of this part of the script, which gives you a pretty good idea of how it would have gone down. I'll link it below. I highly recommend watching it if you haven't yet. As for this video and this scene, it's only one half of what I think is a great alternate ending to the movie. In the same draft that gave us the original death of Peter Ludlow, we're shown immediately afterward the funeral of his uncle, InGen's founder, and what one could argue was the heart of the Jurassic Park films, John Hammond, thus confirming his passing, which was already hinted at with his ailing state early in the movie. We'd have also gotten another appearance by Lex and Tim Murphy as they approach Malcolm and Kelly and inform the two that they plan on telling the world about what they saw in Jurassic Park, to which Malcolm refuses. He says that if their uncle's creations were revealed to the public, they wouldn't be around long, and that just because people don't believe their stories doesn't mean they didn't happen. Just because people don't know of the dinosaurs' existence doesn't mean they're not real. A bittersweet ending to be sure, but one that gives closure to Hammond's character, and allows the dinosaurs on Isla Sorna to continue living in peace without the world knowing anything about them. The only thing that keeps me from saying this is better than the San Diego ending is that there'd have been no advancement. The one thing you have to give The Lost World is that it moved the story of the franchise forward and irreparably changed the universe of the films for good by making the dinosaurs widely known. We wouldn't have gotten that if this was how it wrapped up. For that, I understand why the change was made, but as a scene on its own, I personally prefer this conclusion and like to think some variation of it played out in-universe. Who knows? Maybe Malcolm wouldn't have been the only noteworthy mourner there. Well, another video, another movie, another set of deleted scenes taken care of. I've been really appreciating the positive response to my last deleted scenes video. I hope this installment measured up to its predecessor in ways the actual Lost World movie did not. Unnecessary shade aside, I do still enjoy The Lost World for what it is. Though I won't lie, I actually think some of these deleted scenes would have improved the movie, which isn't really something I can say about any of the scenes I discussed last time. Will this trend continue into the final film of the original Jurassic Park trilogy? Not to give anything away, but yes. Thank you for watching, have a great day, and until JP3's deleted scenes, see ya.